It took a lot of confidence from rugby and dealing with people and leading people. So I would have been thought I would have led from the front, and I guess that would have carried on into my business career then. So I would have taken an awful lot of confidence from the rugby in how to deal with people. And I would always say, particularly there's a rugby mantra. There's some people that you have to put your arm around their shoulder and cajole them on, where there's others you've got to scream in their face to get them motivated. And it's really, really important to know the difference between the two people. And that's the same in a business environment. There's some people that you need to gently bring along, whereas there's others that you need to be more forceful with. And it's been able to spot that. And I think rugby was very good for me in terms of giving me the confidence to be able to lead, and then obviously bring other people along in different ways. And obviously the team aspect then, and that's the most important thing, no matter what you're doing, is building the team around you. As an individual, you can't accomplish anything. You need to have the proper team and support structures around you. And that's what rugby taught me.
Shane Leahy, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me here, Connor. I really appreciate it.
Could we start with Oxygen8? What is it? What does the business do? And maybe just whatever you're comfortable talking about in terms of the scale, maybe number of employees or revenue, whatever you're comfortable discussing.
Yeah, the Oxygen8 Group is now a group of individual technology companies. I guess the main one in Ireland is the Engage Hub, which offers engagement solutions to large corporates to engage their client base. Typical customers would include Sainsbury's, Bank of Ireland, etc. So if you get a text message or an email, it could be coming from the Engage Hub. That would be its Irish business. We also have multiple other businesses and have exited a number of other businesses. So for example, Tola Mobile, which is a mobile payments business in Africa, was wholly owned by the Oxygen8 Group, but we sold it off. I still retain a minority stake in the business, but it's now an independent business, and it acts as a payment service provider to mobile wallets in Africa, which is the main payment mechanism in Africa and is growing very, very strongly, operating in something like 28 different countries in Africa now. We have other businesses that operate within the group, but they largely operate autonomously now with their own management team. So we have involvement in a director basis and a shareholder basis, but they largely operate autonomously, including the Vivery group of companies, which offer mobile and payment solutions to large media companies.
Are those, if you don't mind me asking, just on that, did you buy them with management teams already in place, or did you start them and put management teams in place, or how did that kind of evolve?
We would have had a very entrepreneurial business in that we would have grown them all from a startup basis and would have spread the businesses in many different areas, and I guess then looked to focus them and put all their management teams in place. We operated right across the globe in many different territories and in many different business areas. So to properly manage them, it was necessary to put their own management teams in place, and I'm glad to say that's worked out very successfully for us.
Do you have, and I'm sure you do, but what kind of size is the group at the moment, or where is it kind of
Yeah,
reached?
it's not something that we actually consolidate, because they're actually distinct individual business units and groups, and some of them independent, but they would be well in excess of 100 million in turnover, and thankfully the vast majority of them would be very profitable. We've then some smaller business units that we're growing, such as Bima Rahizi, which is an insurance business in Kenya, looking to take that bigger into other markets, but that would be, for example, a small unit at this moment in time.
How did you get involved? I suppose firstly in the industry before you started the company, because I know you were a professional rugby player, and then it seems like a jump right from professional rugby into telecoms. How did you?
Yeah, it would have. When I was younger, rugby would have been very much the focus of my life. I wouldn't have gone. I didn't go to college out of school. Went straight into work and focused on my rugby, which was amateur at the time. And then rugby went professional. I was lucky enough to play with Connacht and Munster with professional contracts, and loved that. But I guess I had two children quite young, and at the time the professional rugby was a very insecure job. You were contracted year to year, so I had to grow up and get a real job. and I joined a telecoms company called Stenter. From there, I met with Gary Corbett, who was the founder of the original Opera Group, and I set up their Irish business and subsequently took over as Group CEO of the business, and then we grew it from there. At the time, I guess it was a 30 million turnover company, and we grew it very quickly to being over 100 million and reasonably profitable. So
And did you buy into that business? Did you say there, or what way did it work?
I would have had equity from the start because of setting up the Irish side of it, and then I would have been a minority shareholder in the overall business, and I guess we would have set up very different business units. So we have a varied structure within the business in terms of the shareholding.
Talk to me just a little bit about confidence, right? Going from professional rugby right into business, okay? And so, for example, I heard Dennis Hickey talking about this in around about 2013, but he had said something, and I don't want to quote him on it because I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said there was a kind of, everyone kind of looks at professional rugby players as very confident people, right? And obviously, there's leadership, there's so much involved in professional sport that all these qualities that people would kind of maybe look up to and admire. But then he said that kind of moving into his kind of business career or corporate career, there was almost he didn't say fish out of water, but that's the kind of sense I got from that. There was a almost a confidence, if not a complete loss of confidence, a little blip maybe in his confidence. Did you experience anything like that?
I think it would have been a bit different for me because I didn't go to college. I took a lot of confidence from rugby and dealing with people and leading people. So when you're on a rugby field and when you're, I would have been a second row and I guess quite big. So I would have been thought I would have led from the front, and I guess that would have carried on into my business career then. So I would have taken an awful lot of confidence from the rugby in how to deal with people, and I would always say, particularly there's a rugby mantra, there's some people that you have to put your arm around their shoulder and cajole them on, where there's others you've got to scream in their face to get them motivated. And it's really, really important to know the difference between the two people. And that's the same in a business environment. There's some people that you need to gently bring along, whereas there's others that you need to be more forceful with. And it's been able to spot that. And I think rugby was very good for me in terms of giving me the confidence to be able to lead, and then obviously bring other people along in different ways. And obviously the team aspect then, and that's the most important thing, no matter what you're doing, is building the team around you. As an individual, you can't accomplish anything. You need to have the proper team and support structures around you. And that's what rugby taught me.
Talk to me a little bit about that kind of team, and because I suppose in your own business you would have been obviously heavily involved in um, fostering the culture, right? Creating the culture, and doing all of that. Whereas maybe you would have kind of gone into teams that already had kind of different cultures and everything before. Just talk to me about kind of putting in a culture and leadership in general, and how you think about that.
I guess first and foremost, my style would be leading from the front. There is obviously many other different business styles, but mine would be leading from the front. I wouldn't ask anybody to do anything that I wasn't prepared to do myself, and that would be important to me. I guess the second part then is identifying your strengths and weaknesses. I am, I guess, entrepreneurial in terms of, but I'm not particularly organized. So it's very important for me to have a structure around me that can support my skills. And I think that was where I did reasonably well, is that I was able to identify people that were able to complement what I did. And as I said, the team is by far and away the most important thing. So I guess in a nutshell, it's to lead from the front and then build a team that can put the correct structures, support, and actually do the job that you set out.
Is it more like is it more like coaching, or is it more like playing when you're leading a business? And I'm sorry, right, for all these kind of comparisons with rugby, but it's a fascinating kind of background to come from and into business, and to have obviously been so successful in business. I just think there's probably something there.
Yeah, and not at all. As I said, rugby was very important to me, and I guess it's a little bit of a mixture of both. It's like being the captain of the team, which is a player in itself, but it's always also leading the team on the field. And that would have been, as I said, very important to me. So it's a mixture of both of them. But unless you have the correct players on the team, and unless they're going all in the same direction, you haven't a hope of succeeding. So I think that is the most important thing: is setting a goal of what you want to do, and then driving towards that goal.
You mentioned self-knowledge and kind of knowing your own strengths and weaknesses. Did you use a coach or anything to kind of learn about yourself, or did you kind of just learn over time?
I think I just learned over time. I didn't use a coach, but I think particularly in professional rugby, you're told your strengths and your weaknesses particularly very quickly. So it becomes something that you try and identify and then try and fill in the gaps around it. I guess from a business perspective, as I said, the organizational side of things is not my forte. So I need to have a proper structure around me to be able to function.
I had another guest in here yesterday, actually, Pat Byrne from CityJet, and he had made the comparison actually with professional sport. He had said that there's kind of in business there's a lot more failure than there is success. It's kind of like professional sport in that way. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. You learn a hell of a lot more from your failures than you do from the successes. You can enjoy the successes and you can appreciate what's there, but unless you've dealt with the failures, and learned how to get over the failures, you're not going to succeed. So yes, there's failures along the way, and from a rugby parlance, you learned a lot more from sitting glumly in a dressing room after a big loss than you did from the euphoria of the win. So you've got to experience both, but the failures are very, very important.
Talk to me about the early days then of the business, right? And I'm sure you never had a catastrophic failure, right? Because you're still here at all of that. But what were the kind of challenges in the early days, and maybe some of the successes?
Yeah, I guess we would have been very entrepreneurial. We would have had a disparate organization spread right across the globe, from multiple countries in Africa to Australia to the US. So I guess our challenges were focusing in on where we could achieve, because we were so disparate and so widespread. Thankfully, we were able to do that. We were able to identify a number of different areas um, that presented significant opportunities, and we were able to build teams that were able to drive to that. We did have some catastrophic failures. We had a very substantial fraud in our African business. Unfortunately, we had a partner there who diverted quite a substantial amount of money from our African business. And that was a significant issue and an obstacle that we had to deal with. And the sum was in excess of $10 million. So it was a large amount of money, which had a very significant impact in our business, and probably led to the breaking up of the group, which is in hindsight, which was a blessing, because we were able to focus in on then the different operating businesses within the group and give them their correct focuses.
Was it difficult to trust people in some way after that, or did you kind of have systems then to make sure it didn't happen again?
Yeah, I guess it is very difficult and very difficult to deal with, but particularly in Africa, because the systems, the legal systems particularly, are not as robust as you would like them to be, particularly in the commercial world. Yes, it certainly had a significant effect on the business. We did then hone in on each of the individual business units, so that they were much more closely managed and properly, and I guess better structures put in place.
Did you get the money back?
No, unfortunately. And that's about 8 years ago, and we're still going through multiple court cases on it, which is also very distracting. But again, it's one of these things you've got to experience the challenges. We've had a lot of other positives in a lot of other businesses as well. So these are all along the road.
What year was it when you went into the business at the start?
2002, so it is
Okay.
tis
So
20,
okay, so over 20 years ago.
yeah,
And
20 years ago.
do you think, is it easier now, right? And I say easier, but is it now that you're bigger, you've more resources, and obviously you've a more experience and better understanding of certain markets and things like that. Is it Is it easier now? A lot of people talk about how difficult the kind of early years are, and I'm wondering, did you have the same experience?
We had significant growth in the early years, and we're a very profitable business. So I guess the early years we were it was I guess our middle years, our teenage years were the harder for us in terms of getting the we were growing so quickly, getting the right structures in place, and clearly we didn't because of the fraud in our African business. So that would be more of our challenging. I guess that then led to our the business growing up and separating into different business units. So I guess it put more focus on us. So no, in our early years we had very significant growth, which then led to other challenges of not having the correct structures in place, which then led to putting those structures in place and focusing the businesses with individual management teams with full responsibility over their own company.
Did you how did the growth feel at the start, right? And I ask because, it sounds to me kind of exciting. You get involved in this business, you're coming in with kind of already good leadership skills and everything else, and it kind of it takes off, right? And it's kind of going really well. It sounds exciting, but most people I speak to tell me that actually doesn't feel exciting at the time. It usually feels a little bit, there's more anxiety around it. How did it feel for you?
I guess for me it was phenomenal because we were growing very strongly. We were opening up in new markets right across Africa, as I said, Middle East, Southeast Asia, Australia, US, Caribbean. So we were opening and growing very, very quickly. It was exciting. I was on a plane every day, and literally didn't know what area of the world I was going to be in the following week. So it was very exciting, and we were growing very, very strongly.
What was it like? What was it like doing business in all these different countries? From the start, like I think, for example, I deal with a lot of Irish SMEs, okay, and they're mostly like a lot of their customers would be in Ireland, of course, some of them have international customers, but this is such an international business. Like, what was that like to kind of learn about?
It was phenomenal. It was exciting. We were opening new business units in different countries. You were experiencing different cultures, so it was very exciting and all positive. I guess the negative is that we didn't have the correct structures to support the growth that we had put in place. But at the time, we were growing very strongly and very profitable. So it was a very exciting time.
But even with language or culture in any way, were there any things that surprised you maybe about doing a business?
Not really. Again, most of the markets that we would have operated in would have been predominantly English speaking, and I think that was one of the major criteria that we had at the time. But that covers a hell of a lot of Africa, a lot of countries around the world. So culturally, it was generally English. There was no, I don't think there was anything that particularly. I guess doing business in Africa is different. You learn about it the hard way, though, and our cost of education was quite high in terms of the fraud that we had, and that's how you have to describe it as the cost of education. We learned the hard way, but we did learn the lessons.
Like, if it was me, I kind of get excited by the idea of doing business in all these different countries, but I also get a little bit scared, right? And not from a cultural thing, but just because it's so outside of what I know. Does that make sense? Like,
Yep.
even let's say a large English speaking market like the US, where the culture can be quite different, but even just the legal structures and all of that, like, was it a steep learning curve when you were going into these countries?
Absolutely. We had to obviously set up individual companies within the countries themselves, but it was exciting. We had a team that were focused on doing that. We were growing rapidly, so it was very positive.
What about the strategic decision around it? Like, for example, did it come about because you were reading the newspaper and you were like, I think there's an opportunity in Africa, say, or was it someone on the broader team, or how did it all kind of come about?
I guess we were in mobile technology and mobile payments predominantly, so it was just growing rapidly in different markets. So it was a very exciting time, particularly in Africa. As I was saying, we were involved in mobile payments when M-Pesa, which is ubiquitous across Africa, it's owned by Vodafone. It is a mobile payment mechanism. I guess the closest to it here would be Revolut, but was widespread right across Africa. So the opportunities that brought for us to be able to connect into M-Pesa and other mobile wallets opened up significant opportunities for us. So that was very exciting to get in and get developing that. And the same on the mobile technology front. Engage Hub would be very strong in South America, dealing with the mobile operators down there. And again, at the time, it was the markets were opening up, the technology was opening up, and obviously changing dramatically. So it was a very exciting time to be involved in mobile technology.
Did you have goals? Like, did you look into the future at all, right? Or, far into the future and think, we'd like this business to be, X million or X size or be in certain markets. Did you look, how far into the future did you look?
We would have had goals, 3 to 5 year goals, in terms of turnover and profitability would have been the two main metrics. I guess the geographic expansion came about because of chasing that growth, but it was more focused on turnover and
How
profitability at
how
the
often
time.
did you hit the goals?
We regularly hit them, thankfully, until we had our issues in Africa, unfortunately. But we would have regularly hit the goals on an ongoing basis. So it quite a successful business.
Did the goals change like 3 to 5 years? It sounds like a short amount of time, right? And it is a business, but there's enough time there for it to be like, oh, this has happened. We need to kind of change things.
They did, I guess, and going the journey that we had gone, we had become a quite a big, disparate, geographically spread group. So the goals then changed in about focusing into the individual business units and breaking up the group of companies into those individual business units. So that's been successful for us, and those businesses are operating successfully, and we've had a number of exits from them. So it's been a positive experience, I suppose, in that term.
As you've gotten bigger, how has your day to day changed? And I ask because I think, a lot of people, it sounds like in kind of the early days, there's a lot more running around and there's a lot more things maybe going wrong, right? And maybe that might not be true in your case, but has your day to day as the CEO of the group, has that changed at all?
Dramatically. I have stepped back from it quite a bit. I'm a director of a number of the companies. We have monthly board meetings. I'm still heavily involved in our African businesses, but I've stepped back to get engaged in other areas. I founded a charity called One for Humanity, which operates in Ukraine and Gaza and other areas. So I've put my focus into that far more than the business side of things. I'm still involved in the business, but not driving it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, let's talk about one for humanity. So just could you summarize roughly what you do? And we talked about this before, right? But just a little bit for anyone listening, kind of the general points about where you operate and what you do in those.
Yeah, I guess I better start at the start and how it came about. First off, I happened to be in Ukraine just before the war broke out. I mentioned Tola Mobile. It's an African payments business, which we were in the process of selling. We were speaking to a Ukrainian bank at the time, and I went to meet with them in Kyiv just before the war broke out. We subsequently sold the business elsewhere, but that stayed with me. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, I felt I had to get involved. I had to do something. Initially, I volunteered for Goethe Self Help Africa, and I found myself on the Ukrainian border in Ukraine in the early stages of the war, for all of the evacuations. Literally at the time, we were giving out coffees, soups, etc. But I heard all of the stories, and all of the horror stories that were coming out of Ukraine. So I felt I had to do more. I then got in contact with Rugby and Business Contacts to see what we could do. And I got in contact with CMARC, which is the biggest cement company in Ukraine, which is owned by CRH, the Irish company. So we were quickly able to put in infrastructure in place, warehouses and distribution, using their warehouses and distribution, because at the start of the war, the government had requisitioned a significant portion of the logistics of the country to be able to fight the war, and there was a lot of chaos in Ukraine at the time. So we were able to put infrastructure in place, and thankfully, through the support of the National Rehabilitation Hospital and An Garda Síochána, we got aid at an early stage, and were able to prove the concept of that distribution within Ukraine. From that, Goethe Self-Help Africa actually withdrew from Ukraine because they're more of a development agency and African based. So I set up one for humanity along with Norman Sheehan, another Irishman who was heavily involved in the operations director of Goal and now based in the US. And through that, we got in contact with a US charity called Heart to Heart, and we've had a very, very successful partnership with them. We've put in 19 hospital units in Ukraine, right along the front lines in Kherson, Kramatorsk, and Kharkiv, and elsewhere. We've delivered well in excess of $200 million worth of medicine, and that's continuing on a monthly basis through our partnership in with Heart to Heart. We've also spread out in Ukraine into other areas. We work very closely with the UCD Ukraine Trauma Project. We provide the logistics for them. They're a phenomenal organization led by Professor Jerry Burry of UCD and Professor Chris Fitzpatrick and CHI consultant Ludmila Zakharchenko. And they go to Kyiv and Odessa to give training in frontline trauma response. Specifically, there's a drug called TXA, and if you lose an arm or a leg or have a catastrophic injury, if you get this drug within the first hour, it'll substantially increase your chances of survival. However, this drug has to be drilled into your bone, or one of the mechanisms the main mechanism is that they drill into your bone and administer the drug in that way. So it's a serious endeavor, and they've done fantastic work over there, and we're very happy to be involved with them. Outside of that, we work with a charity in Odessa who provide support services to 500 children with profound special needs. Unfortunately, in Ukraine before the war, the children with special needs would have struggled to get support services, and now with the war, it makes it very, very difficult. So it's very important to support them. So through our network, we and our volunteers on the ground, we purchase medicines, specialty medicines, food, and treatments for those children on an ongoing basis. And again, through the business side, back in 2012, I was a finalist in the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year. And through that, I'm involved in the alumni, and they've been very, very supportive of the work that we've done on the ground. And nothing that we would have done in Ukraine would have been possible without them. So what we do, we are volunteers. We pay all of our own expenses. We don't take any salaries or anything like that. We were able to, I guess, put a proof of concept in place early days in all of the different areas that we operate in Ukraine, and then scale it using our business acumen. So it's thankfully it's turned out quite successfully.
When you first started talking about it, you were kind of compelled, right, to get involved after the Russian invasion. What do you think it was, for you personally? Because I think, not everyone in that situation, like as you said yourself, you didn't actually, you dealt with a Ukrainian bank, so it's a kind of big corporate entity. Maybe your personal ties wouldn't have been that tied to Ukraine. Like, what was it about the whole situation that you felt like, you had to get involved?
I think it was a series of events, to be honest. We had obviously the issues in our African business, which affected the business, and I had to break up the group of companies. So I think that was one of the things that was there. My long-term marriage of 25 years had broken up, so I was looking for another focus. I guess I was driven, particularly in the business sense, to provide for my family, my four kids, who, because of the divorce, were now looked after. So I needed a different focus in my life also. So I think it was a series of different events. It wasn't just one. And then happening to be in Ukraine, and then being on the ground in Ukraine and seeing the horrors. I met three girls in the early stages of the war that were coming out of the frontline area in Mariupol, and they had to swap one of their friends with a Russian garrison for safe passage. So it's important to keep in mind that the horror stories that are there. You become used to seeing the pictures on the papers, but it's not Ukraine fighting for their country. That girl was somebody's girlfriend, daughter, sister. So the Ukrainians are fighting for their lives. And I think it was important for me to be able to, at that time, to be able to assist There was also other stories that you just come across and that affect you and compel you to get more and more involved.
Why hospitals? And just to kind of from my viewing of it right online and talking to you, they're kind of containers, right? They're container hospitals around where other clinics and things like that would have been damaged and all the rest of it. What was the kind of genesis of that? You said you kind of you would use kind of business acumen and things like that to kind of to start and then scale it. What was the kind of start of the clinics and why that?
Yeah, I guess from the early stages, as I said, we put in significant infrastructure in that we had CMARC suppliers' warehouses and their infrastructure, which was right across the country. So that was a very valuable resource, and we were looking at what would be the best or the best use of that, and we came that it would be medical solutions, both medicines and the hospital units themselves, and that we would be able to effectively deliver them to the front lines in the early stages. So that led us to speaking to Heart, and they provided the medical containers. These are fantastic units. They're self-contained operating theatres. They've got solar panels on the roof, battery backup, air conditioning, and then everything fully equipped operating theatres within inside them. So the X-ray and everything that you would need to do a surgery. And 4 years later, they're still operating. I had hoped to visit one of the or two of them in Kherson next week, and unfortunately, those have just recently been knocked out by Russian attacks, and the hospital that they were sitting in has been destroyed. So it just shows that they were. I guess we were able to put them into effective use in frontline areas where they could be effective for 4 years. So that was. I guess the focus was in delivering as much impact as we possibly could, and then with Heart to Heart, we have a very successful ongoing partnership with them. Um, and they've been in operating for 40 years, so they have relationships with the large pharmaceutical companies globally, Johnson and Johnson, Teva, amongst others. So they're provided with a substantial number of medicines donated to them on a monthly basis. They send us the list of those medicines. We send it to the hospitals in Ukraine, and they effectively order those medicines from us. Those medicines are then flown from the US into either Vienna or Poland, and then trucked to our warehouse in Mukachevo, where we deliver them in the front lines. And it's approximately $10 million on a monthly basis that we deliver. We have two big orders that are going through at the moment. We have some medicines that are landing into Odessa uh, today or yesterday, and that will be delivered into Kherson next week. So we've been able to put a significant infrastructure in place, and the best use of that infrastructure was the delivery of medicines. I guess from there then as well, um, when the situation in Gaza worsened, we also felt compelled that we needed to do something in Gaza, and from there, Ross Kelly, who's another Entrepreneur of the Year alumni, who I didn't know prior to this, contacted me and got involved, and he led our Gaza response. And again, with the assistance of Professor Jerry Burry and Professor Chris Fitzpatrick and medical institutions, including RCSI, UCD, and others, we were able to buy a hospital unit for Gaza. And thankfully, again, using our network, we were able to get that hospital unit into Gaza and up and operating. We then raised funds largely from other Entrepreneur of the Year alumni to put additional units in place in Gaza, but unfortunately the border had closed at that point. But the unit that we have put in place was a part of a larger field hospital, and that field hospital delivered 13% of all surgeries in Gaza in the last year. We had hoped and had the funds to get in an additional 4 units into Gaza, but unfortunately, because the border had shut, we weren't able to get those in. So we switched our focus to providing the funds to keeping that hospital unit, which was operated by the International Medical Corps, open. Unfortunately, USAID was closed. It had been providing the funds for that hospital unit, but with Donald Trump coming back into power, USAID was dramatically closed and the funds were removed. So we were able to use our funds to keep that hospital open for a number of months, and those funds, along with funds provided by RCSI and UCD, etc., kept that hospital open. And thankfully, the US State Department stepped back in and provided additional funding to that hospital. Uh, but if we hadn't provided the funds, or if RCSI hadn't stepped in, that hospital wouldn't have been there to be able to remain open. So it's due to the phenomenal work of Ross, Chris, and Jerry, and the funds that they were able to garner from the medical institutions in EOI, that we're able to deliver a very successful solution within what is a horrific situation in Gaza.
From your work in Gaza, I know you're doing something in Sudan as well at the moment. Depending on what news outlet you read or whatever, we hear a lot about aid being blocked and things like that. What do you know about that, or what can you say about it from your kind of work on the ground in these?
Initially, when we started there was a trickle that was going across the border, and literally a trickle. It was very, very difficult to get into a hospital, the first hospital unit in, but then it slammed shut. There was no aid getting in for a very considerable period of time, which led to a horrific situation down there. There is a trickle getting in there now, and probably more than a trickle, but still, it's certainly not easy to operate or get aid in there. It's not as bad as it was, but that's not a satisfactory position. That it's still a horrific situation. What's happening in Gaza is horrific. There's 2.2 million people in a tiny strip of land, which is 1/8 the size of County Limerick. My home county is Limerick, so I always bring it back to that. So it's a tiny strip of land with 2.2 million people, which have been utterly destroyed. So it's a horrific situation.
Given the nature of this work, right, that you're doing, and we talked a little bit earlier about how the failures are kind of more frequent in business and in professional sports, right? It must feel that magnified by 100 in this instance, because no matter how much successful, how many lives you save, essentially, uh, you can kind of never get a grip on the whole project, if that makes sense. Does it feel like that?
Absolutely, and we've had significant failures on that side as well, and they hurt. We had the funds to get 5 hospital units in place, but we could only get one in place because of the border being slammed shut. So that was incredibly frustrating for Ross and for Jerry and for Chris and myself. But it was a testament to Ross Kelly's hard work and to Jerry's and Chris's, that they found a way of getting around that, and being able to support the existing hospital was there and keep that open. So you do experience the failures, and particularly on the humanitarian side, you do experience them more. But I guess it gives you the determination and enthusiasm to succeed in other areas, and push on. And the same in Ukraine. We looked at multiple different areas and multiple different routes, and we tried many different things before we finally set on the route that we were on, which we were able to do a proof of concept, get that successful, and then scale it from there. And I guess the failures elsewhere gave you the determination to scale it elsewhere, and thankfully we have been able to scale it.
What's it like? You're going to Kherson next week, as you said, and you're there quite a bit. What's it like on the front line?
It's horrific, absolutely horrific. I guess the majority of Ukraine, normal life is going on as normal. Odessa is a beautiful city. Kyiv is a beautiful city. Lviv, another beautiful city. And they're all operating as normal. Sounds strange, but the bars, the restaurants are open. The traffic in Kyiv is horrific. Normal life has to get on because it's 4.5 years later. It's dramatically different on the front lines. On the front line, particularly Kherson, it has become a human safari. The skies are filled with drones, and those drones are hunting humans. And it's a dystopian, horrific situation. Um, At the moment, the Ukrainians are getting on top, which is obviously a positive thing, but they're getting on top because their drones are more effective at killing humans, which is a horrific thing. So, while it's great to see Ukraine fighting back, it's also a very scary situation there. And AI. One of the reasons the Ukrainians are doing so well is that for the last 500 meters, their drones are AI powered, which means you're putting machines um, in charge of a war in the final area. So it is dystopian. It's horrific. And there's still a lot of people there. There's still 60,000 people living in Kherson, 5,000 children, and for different reasons. So Kherson is there's a river, much like Dublin. There's a river in the center of Kherson which cuts the city in half, and the left bank is Russian occupied, and the right bank is Ukrainian occupied. So there's families that have been split. So there would be some family members on the left, the Russian occupied bank. So the families can't leave the other side, or they may own property or may not want to leave. So life goes on there, but it's not a normal life. It is a constant hunt, a constant safari of drones hunting.
We'll link to it in the show notes of this, but before we started, you sent me a little snippet, basically that the Irish Independent, I think, had put together for you, and just showing you in Kherson and what uh, the situation there, and what you're doing when you're there and everything else. And you said something in that video, once you see a bird, you kind of get this, your heart skips a beat, because to you it's a black outline, right? And that could be a drone. And I was wondering, why are you putting yourself basically in danger, right? And why are you endangering your life? There's obviously something driving you, right, to do it, and to be there. I was wondering, could you just talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
I ask that question of myself a lot, and there's three main reasons. One, the first reason and the main reason is to deliver the aid. The aid has to go to get into the people that are there. And again, I guess it comes from the leading from the front side of things, as I mentioned earlier. So that's the main part. The second part of that is awareness. You have to keep it. It's Gaza has fallen off the news. Ukraine has fallen off the news. There's nothing being reported on the horrific what's going on in Sudan at the moment. So it's important to highlight what's going on there to help them. And then the third, which is also really, really important, is to show the support to people that are there. I think as humans, our greatest fear is not death or injury, it's being left alone and being alone. And I'm constantly surprised at the strength that people take from you just showing up. And I spoke to another consultant, a medical consultant during the week, who's operated in Central and West Africa. And his main thing is that, just being there supports people. And I see that and feel that on the ground. So they're the three main reasons. And I guess they're all equally as important. And it's important. They're, and let's not forget, they are defending for their lives. This is a Russian invasion, barbaric Russian invasion, which is horrific, and they're fighting for their lives. So it's important to support them. And I firmly believe that the Ukrainians are defending Europe. So I think it's very, very important to be able to support them.
Do people have hope? I actually don't want to make an assumption, but what would you say? I'd imagine fear is a huge thing for people in these areas. What would you say is the main kind of feeling on the ground?
It's changed and changes quite a bit over the different seasons. During the winter, it's obviously a lot tougher. It's -20, and when the Russians are knocking out the energy sources, life becomes very, very difficult. But I guess the main feeling that I'm getting at the moment over there is determination. And it's a grim determination, but it is a determination. They have to defend themselves. There isn't another choice. But the despair that was there a couple of years ago does appear to be dissipated in a large point. So they appear to be much more determined, but also weary. The war has been going on 4.5 years. They want it to come to an end. It's my firm belief that they would accept the lines as they currently are, even though that would mean giving up a sizable portion of their country. But they do want peace. but they need peace with security guarantees because Putin came in, took Crimea, and now he came back and has taken the eastern side of the country. There's no doubt in their minds or my mind that if they don't have security guarantees, that Putin will withdraw, rearm, and be back again in a number of years. So the most important thing there is the security guarantees, and if they got those, but how do you give those security guarantees? They had them previously, so that would that needs to be sorted. But I guess the feeling on the ground is determination, but there is definitely war weariness there as well. They want this to end, but it has to end once and for all.
Like, if I think about business where obviously the stakes are just so much lower, right? Things happen all the time where you're kind of like, oh, we were doing that and now we can't do it anymore because, we've lost a key person or just whatever it might be. You might experience a fraud, for example, or whatever. Um, Again, it must be, you've put in these clinics and these hospitals and then it's destroyed by a drone. Like, how often are you changing, and how often um the fighting changing, which causes you to kind of change your approach essentially?
I guess in the early stages, we changed a lot. We tried a large number of different approaches, but I guess as we settled into what we're doing now, that's become more constant. Yes, we have to change the location of where we are. We've had to repair some of the hospital units. We've had to relocate some of the hospital units, but I guess that's more tactical responses rather than a change of approach. As I said, we've been able to scale the access to medicine approach that we've had. So we do focus on different areas. At the moment, we've got a significant focus on Kherson because it's badly needed down there. But Kramatorsk and Kharkiv in the north, we've also supplied, and we will. So we will change the location focus, but now we've gotten a model that works. We've scaled it, and we want to continue to do that.
It can it be hard not to, I suppose you've the charity with that helps the disabled children. Is Can it be hard, when you see something that clearly needs support, can it be hard to kind of not get distracted by that and to want to help, in these situations?
Yeah, very difficult. We have gone into a number of different areas. We provide specific medicines to a number of specific families in Ukraine, which is on a lower scale, but it's people that need help. So yes, you are distracted, but in terms of that's a distraction that you have to do. We do try and keep focused on where we can scale. And that's with the 500 children in Odessa, we've worked again with the professors to do a study on those children, so that we can provide long-term care and support to them, and that's how we would look to scale that support. So everywhere that we're looking at, we're trying to see how we can make a significant difference in terms of doing a proof of concept and then scaling up that. And I guess using a business approach to a humanitarian issue. And thankfully, we've been successful at that with the hospital units, with the medicine, with supporting the children, and with the UCD trauma project in Ukraine.
You mentioned a few people, but also the EY Entrepreneur Alumni Group. Um, what else are you seeing? What other positive things are you seeing from maybe other groups or other countries? And look, maybe there's too many to mention, but if there's any worth highlighting, I think it'd
Yeah,
be
I think the European response has been hugely positive in terms of Ukraine. The vast majority of countries are very supportive, and with Orban leaving power in Hungary, I think they're coming around as well. So the support for Ukraine has been fantastic. Um, I guess in terms of groups, the Irish groups have been phenomenal out there. Caelan Robertson, in terms of media on the ground, has done a phenomenal job on highlighting a number of different areas over there. I've come across a number of different Irish groups which are doing great work over there. As I've mentioned, I work with the UCD Ukraine Trauma Project as well, but there's many others. So it's fantastic to see, and it's fantastic to see people getting together to help. And this, the Dutch, the Austrians. I'm actually taking an Austrian news crew into Kherson next week, and they're looking to highlight what's going on in her son. So it's phenomenal to see Europe pull together. You would like to see it pull together a lot more, particularly in terms of Gaza, but you do see it in terms of Ukraine. And it's vastly important. I have no doubt in my mind that Russia would have continued on into Moldova had Ukraine fallen as they had expected it to, and then they may or may not have gone into the Baltic states. So it's a scary world that we live in, and Europe is rearming, and that's a sad situation, but it has to happen for what the where the world is at the moment.
Do you think there's anything that isn't being highlighted, or is there anything that you'd like to bring to light? Right, you talked about the people who are helping, right, and you're obviously helping a huge amount over there. But just anywhere in these areas, is there something you'd like to draw attention to?
I guess the situation with Oxygen8 alumni in Limerick, my own home county, as a school student, I actually toured the facility down there, and I'm from Adair, so Limerick and Adair, so the factory itself is not far from my house. And the continued exporting sorry, exporting of aluminium to Russia is wrong. And the factory hopefully could stay open, but it shouldn't be allowed to export to Russia as it is doing on an ongoing basis. There's been a lot of talk about the aluminium being used in the manufacture of weapons and machinery for war in Russia, and it's been brought to my attention from in Ukraine of the use of aluminium in an ammunition called termite. There is a very scary drone being operated in by the Russians in Ukraine, which is called a dragon drone, which is particularly horrific. This drone spews molten metal, which is made of aluminium and iron oxide mixed, and this burns at an incredibly high temperature, and it's put on machinery or foxholes or people, and it burns right through them. This termite is manufactured from aluminium. Whether that aluminium is provided by Oxygen8 or not, I do not know, but it doesn't matter. We're providing aluminium to Russia, and that's freeing. If it's not being used in the production of termite, it's freeing up other aluminium that is being used for the production of termite. So that is one specific. I know the government are looking at it. I believe there's been a report that I haven't read yet, but that have said that there's no evidence in relation to providing or that the aluminium is being used in producing weapons, but there's no evidence to say that it isn't either. So I think that is one area that we need the aluminium exports to Russia has to stop.
Is it not illegal? I'm sorry, because I remember, and this is when the sanctions came in, and we were all kind of looking at stuff, and I was just saying, do we have any kind of connection, like, in our own tiny business, about, any kind of small connection to Russia, or could we, was there any kind of anything we were doing even with a Russian supplier or anything at that stage, or a client or something? Is it not illegal to export to do business with Russia at this stage?
No, it isn't. There's a sanctions list, and obviously you can't provide the materials that are on the sanctions list. But aluminium is, but alumni, which is what's produced in Oxygen8, which is then subsequently manufactured into aluminium, is not on the sanctions list. So the Oxygen8 alumni is owned by a Russian company, Rusal, which is owned by a sanctioned individual, a Russian sanctioned individual. So it is, and there's a lot of European companies that won't deal with the company because of that, and hence why one of the only markets for the product is Russia. But that doesn't make it, just because it isn't sanctioned, doesn't make it right, and it shouldn't be exported. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not looking for the factory to be closed. That's not my decision, but it should not be exporting materials that can and are being used to manufacture weapons and in Ukraine, or manufactured in Russia to be used against the Ukrainians.
When you were talking about, you were kind of maybe looking for a new focus, right? And this came up. I feel like you've obviously, you're energized by this problem, right? And trying to help and doing all of that. Has um have you reflected on anything that's changed for you, and just for you personally, and how it's kind of made you think about um either business or life in a different way? Has it given you kind of perspective?
I guess absolutely it has. It's a scary world we live in at the moment, and we have some scary leaders in power at the moment, which is which is going in the wrong direction. And there's no point in saying otherwise. We the mightiest seems to strive at the moment and impose their will on others, and that's the wrong way to go in my opinion. So I believe we need to refocus in other areas to be able to, in some small way, combat that. That we are we have to live uh, peacefully together, and all of the indications are going in a different direction at the moment. So I think it's important to stand up and do something that supports other people rather than exploits um, or determines determines by might what should happen. So
This is completely on me, by the way, right? So don't I don't want you to feel like you're responsible for this and ever, but living my life in Dublin, right, where there's peace, and I can I can maneuver around and everything. And I try not to kind of read the news, right, because it's kind of, I sort of feel a bit powerless. But I also feel, there's just a lot of negativity, and sometimes I just don't want that through my day to day. And then I speak to someone like you, or my wife might bring something to my attention about, what's happening, and there's definitely a sense of gratitude, right, for the life I live, which is great. But there's also a sense of guilt, okay? And I kind of feel like, I should be doing more, or maybe if I was kind of better informed on all of this, that maybe I would do something. How would you um uh maybe suggest that people like me, are people just kind of going about their day to day here, lucky as we are in Ireland, how might we be able to help?
yeah, I think we're incredibly blessed in Ireland. We've had a fantastically growing economy and a supportive government, and we have a privileged lifestyle in Ireland, and long may that continue. But there are significant risks to that. Ukraine is only a 3-hour flight away from us. The Russian shadow fleet and the Russian Navy is operating off our coast. They have been surveying the undersea cables. They have been loitering around. There has been drones operating in our areas. So while we have a fantastic lifestyle at the moment, we've got to be careful that that's maintained into the future. I do think it's important that we are able to defend ourselves, and that's even leading this conversation into another area, in that I think we're being naive that we have relied on the US and our European neighbours in the past to provide our security. But as we've seen what's happened with the US, particularly with the EU and NATO, you can't guarantee that support. And it is. It is while we have a fantastic lifestyle, it is a scary world that we live in, and I do think we do need to take further actions, and particularly the way the world is going, and particularly with the way the world is going with AI and drones. It's particularly scary. I think Ireland is very technology advanced, so it should be doing a hell of a lot more in terms of its capabilities, but we seem to be chasing them away. Mana, who I'm familiar with, who would have been the drone delivery company that would have been based in Ireland, have effectively not pulled out of Ireland, but relocated from Ireland to the US. And that's a technology, not necessarily a defense technology, but it's a technology which should have been fostered and grown here. Instead, they've had to go elsewhere. So I do think as a business community, we need to be um, we need to be appreciative of what we've got, but we also need to be careful that we can maintain that. And we are at the whim of others at the moment, and I think that's a situation. So what the general public, or what can we do? Um, we can stop Anish alumni exporting to Russia as a first small step, but we then also need to look at our own government and how they will move to effectively ensure that um, our country is can continue on in the prosper that it has.
Do we have a leverageable position? And I asked basically because I was at a wedding, 5 years ago or something, and I was in this conversation. And part of this, my approach to not reading the news, means that sometimes I'm in the embarrassing situation of being uninformed when I'm speaking to someone. And there was a conversation basically at this table around Ireland's position in terms of its neutrality, but also the underwater cables that you mentioned there. That and I've looked into this after, right? Hence my kind of embarrassment from the situation helped me look into it, and our kind of geopolitical position in terms of essentially what I've come to understand, or my understanding of it, is that there's underwater cables essentially that go from the US to Ireland, and that those are responsible. I think they're owned by the likes of Meta and Facebook and things, and Amazon and things like that. But they essentially are responsible for kind of internet connectivity and things like that. So if those were to be disturbed or damaged in any way, that would cause huge problems maybe for large companies in the US, and maybe the US in general. I could be wrong on all that, right? That's only what I got for ChatGPT, a couple of years ago. But um, do you think we have a leverageable position there in Ireland to kind of maybe get more assistance from the US, or from kind of larger powers or larger military powers?
Yeah, I think in that regard there would potentially be some support in relation to that, but there's also Ireland is reliant on electricity cables coming from the UK and France, and gas as well. And there, it's Ireland is solely reliant on those. It's not they're not important for France or UK or anybody else. It's Ireland, and they need to be defended. The internet cables that you're talking about, yes, they're vital for the world economies, but Ireland is a huge tech country, and they're vital for our for that continuation as well. So it is very important that we're able to effectively ensure that defend them, and we can't at this moment in time. And I think with the way technology is changing, let's face it, the Irish Army, while the individuals are fantastic, they've been under resourced and underfunded for a long period of time, while we have relied on neutrality, and that would be very hard for traditional armed forces to catch up. But certainly the way technology is going, and with the tech advantage that Ireland has, I think there is opportunity from a tech perspective to be able to step up in terms of being able to effectively defend those cables. And the nature of war has completely changed in terms of what's happening on the front lines. It is, unfortunately, and I hate saying this, but it is a drone war in Ukraine, and probably the first drone war that we faced, where drones are effectively killing humans, and that's the nature of it. So, from a tech perspective, we have the opportunity and can catch up with that, but we need to put a focus on that.
Do you think there's an urgency as well? Because I think, like even just talking about my own life there and the kind of comfort, right? There'd be a naivety, sure, but I might not feel like we're, during my day to day, I might not feel like we're in a very precarious position. But then if I just think of something like COVID, right, and how overnight my life and the world changed, and Ireland changed overnight, something can happen very quickly is what I realize. And do you think there's an urgency around maybe just doing something about that.
Absolutely. You just have to look at Greenland and Canada. The relationship between the US and Canada has dramatically changed, and the Canadians are effectively taking steps to be able to defend themselves from the US, from a monetary perspective, but also from a military perspective. And it's also horrific to see what's happening in Greenland, because it's the breakup of or the fracturing of NATO, and the US demanding Greenland. So they would have been incredibly, or seen themselves as incredibly safe and incredibly stable places just a couple of years ago, and now they're in a different situation. And the same with Ireland. The times have changed. Ireland could become strategically important to the US, and therefore they may want to have a greater say in what's going on in the country to be able to defend themselves. Or the Russians may want to a strategic location elsewhere. So yes, you've got to take these threats seriously. I know it's to some extent it sounds far fetched, but it would have been incredibly far fetched to think of Canada being in a precarious situation, or Greenland being in a precarious situation, and they're now facing direct threats. So I think Ireland has got to be very open-minded to the threats that are potentially out there.
I'm a bit embarrassed, right, asking this question, right, because you can really tell, right, and you can tell just from your voice. So anyone who's listening to this is going to be able to tell. There's an earnestness, right, that's coming across, and I don't get any shred of almost kind of like personal ambition or anything like within what you're doing. But do you have a sense of pride at all, or do you ever reflect on that in terms of what you're doing?
Absolutely, a sense of pride. I'm proud of what our team has achieved, particularly in Ukraine. We've been able to step in and scale a humanitarian response, which has helped people. So absolutely, a sense of pride in relation to it. It's the best thing I've ever done, and I've the sense of achievement is just incredible that I've gotten from it. So I've gotten a hell of a lot more. We are volunteers. We don't take any salaries and things, but I've gotten a hell of a lot more out of what I'm doing in Ukraine than I've given. So I guess that drives me on, in that a sense of achievement, a sense of a sense of goodwill, etc., has been phenomenal. I'd love to do more, and I'm trying to do more, but you've got to balance all of these things out then as well. So
Shane Leahy, it's been a pleasure talking to you this morning, and thank you so much for coming in. I know you're heading off next week, and you came in on a Saturday, so I really appreciate you coming in. Um, I want to ask you about, because you were recognised by the EY alumni group a couple of years ago for the humanitarian work that you're doing, and there's a video online that people can watch. We'll put it in the show notes again, where you spoke about what your dad had said and the kind of ethos you were bringing forward, which was do as much as you can for as many as you can for as long as you can. And I just thought, just to finish up, I'd like to just ask you about that and ask you about your dad and
yeah, I was very close to my dad, and unfortunately, we lost him 2.5 years ago. And his last message to me was, "Do as much as you can, for as many as you can, for as long as you can." And I think that resonated incredibly with me. And it's important to have something to strive towards, and I guess that's what's driving me forward in terms of that at the moment.
Shane Leahy, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.